Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look back at the worst gadgets in the history of Brawl Stars. So gadgets been in the game for a couple of years now, and there have truly been some awful gadgets in the history of Brawl Stars. So before we jump into it, make sure you're using the correct code. That'd be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's hop right into it. Okay, guys, so jumping into the 10th worst gadget of all time, we have Jacky's brand new gadget rebuild. So this gadget has been completely useless ever since it's been brought out into the game. It only rebuilds the tiniest radius around her, and to be honest, the other gadget for Jacky is just a way better option. And really, like, you don't always face off against wall breakers with a Jacky, and I know sometimes the wall breakers can be her biggest counter, but it doesn't really rebuild a lot, so you don't get a lot of value with it. Really underwhelming, and is definitely in desperate need of a buff. Okay, so now coming in at the 9th worst gadget of all time, we have Tick's first ever gadget, which was released back in March 2020, called Backup Mine. So with Backup Mine, all Tick did was literally do a little dash forward and then it would poop out a 700 damage mine, which literally did nothing, especially against aggro brawlers. You know, Mortis would just have an absolute field day on you. You know, you'll dash away, you maybe survive an extra 0.5 seconds, but you'd 100% die every single time. You could probably make some cool plays with it in terms of like Brawl Ball, but other than that, it was just so bad. He had no defensive capabilities whatsoever. Alright, guys, so now moving into the 8th worst gadget of all time, we have Max with her current gadget, Sneaky Sneakers. So with this gadget, initially upon release, after 4 seconds, you used to TP back to the spot when you first activated your gadget and actually get full HP back. So it was somewhat okay of a gadget. At the beginning, I thought it'd be a really OP mechanic because there's abilities like this in other games like Valorant, but I just felt like this gadget, just ever since it's been released, has been so underwhelming. You have to get such extreme pressure with it and get a lot of value out of it, and basically the only value you're getting is if you're actually going to receive some damage, because ultimately you're going to TP back to a spot which you probably won't want to really go back to, which doesn't really make sense overall. I just feel like this gadget has been trash ever since it's been released. Okay, so next up, coming in as the 7th worst gadget of all time, we have Amber's brand new gadget, Dancing Flames. So with this gadget, you have 3 flames that orbit you for 5 seconds, dealing 500 damage per hit. So you look at this gadget and you think, well, by just looking at the text that it provides, it seems somewhat decent, right? You know, it could feel like a Bee Rattled Hive back when it was broken, but it feels nothing like that. It's so terrible. Practically, I've tried it out a bunch, and especially when you're pushing up behind the wall, it feels like you should be able to hit them, and a lot of times it doesn't even connect onto them, and a lot of times they'll probably run into it, deal 500 damage, and then run out of it. And because it's such a small radius, you're barely going to get any damage. For me, it has to be one of the worst gadgets of all time. Okay, so now jumping into the 6th worst gadget of all time, we have Karl's gadget called Heat Ejector. So ever since this has been released, it's been a terrible gadget. It's been reworked multiple times, and it still provides to be one of the worst gadgets inside of the game. Ever since, again, as I said, it's been released, it's been in my worst 5, worst 6 gadget rankings ever since I've been doing those type of videos. Every time I look back on my videos, this gadget was always in it. It's been so bad. It's been reworked a lot. As I said, at the beginning, you used to be able to press the gadget and then it would literally poop out flames, dealing like 300 damage per second, which it was only really good if you had your super activated. You could actually do a little bit of damage on the high safe if left alone, but still practically it wasn't really the best. It got reworked, so it followed its pickaxe as well. That didn't really work out. There's been other ones as well, but right now it only deals 1,200 damage, I believe, if it actually hits someone over time, and that's still really bad. I can't believe this gadget hasn't been completely just destroyed or just completely reworked. Alright, guys, so now moving into the 5th worst gadget of all time, we have Shelly's gadget called Clay Pigeons. So Clay Pigeons right now is pretty decent, but back when it was first released, it used to be so terrible. Worst gadget in the game, probably by far, and especially when you look back on my old worst gadget videos, if you want to take a look back at them, you can see a lot of Karl Heat Ejector on there, and you can see a lot of Clay Pigeons, because basically when it was first released, all it did was just one shot of Clay Pigeons, and a lot of times you probably just deal like 840 damage. It was really hard to get true value out of it, and for me, it has to be one of the worst gadgets of all time. Okay, so next up, as the 4th worst gadget in the game, we have Poco's gadget called Protective Tune. So this gadget really hasn't been touched ever since its release, and everyone knows that this gadget is completely awful. It's only really good in such certain circumstances. I'm talking about a crow slow, maybe a frank stun, something like that. But in terms of value, it's really hard to pinpoint and get the correct value all of the time. I've only really seen this gadget used in competitive a few times when crow is insanely meta on a certain map where Poco can just remove his slow. But overall, as I said, it's just really frustrating to try and get exact value out of this gadget, because there's only a certain scenarios where you can actually like remove adverse effects and it actually be of value for your team. Okay, so now coming in at the third worst gadget of all time, we have Darryl's gadget called Recoiling Rotator. So right now it's actually a pretty decent gadget, but back when it was first released, it used to be absolutely terrible. I had to look back at old clips and I completely forgot that whenever you activate the gadgets, you actually stood still and span around. It didn't charge up your super. It did less damage. I think the most damage you could actually do with this gadget as well, when I was literally, if he was on top of them like a high save, I think it was around 4,200 damage. So that isn't really a lot. It just left you really vulnerable. And overall, I think this gadget was just completely useless. It didn't really help Darryl out whatsoever. Even if you had no ammo, it was actually of a hindrance if you popped this gadget. So yeah, it was just funny to me how bad this gadget was. Okay, so next up, as the second worst gadget of all time, we have Dynamite's gadget, Fidget Spinner. So Fidget Spinner has been just such a meme throughout the community ever since its release. It's a pretty fun gadget right now because you get the additional speed boost, but back when it was first released, another gadget just like the Darryl one, where whenever you activate the gadget, you just stood still, you froze. It was just so terrible. Imagine a gadget literally making you stuck in the mud. It made you such a free target for literally any single brawler within the game, and it wasn't even like the gadget did a lot of damage. It just flew out bombs everywhere. You'd probably maximum hit one of those dynamite sticks, which would do like 800 damage or something. It was just such a terrible gadget when you look back at it, and still now it is pretty bad. So it has to be the second worst gadget in the history of Brawl Stars. Okay guys, so now moving into the worst gadget of all time, we have Colette's gadget called Nah. So this gadget, when first released, was absolutely terrible. So Colette was released first on the 14th of September 2020, and Colette was an awful brawler, one of the worst brawlers of all time when first released, and this was especially because of her gadgets. So it was really hard to finish off brawlers. It was really awkward to work out how to finish off a brawler, and this gadget really didn't help. So basically, upon release, this gadget did 40% of Colette's health at the time. It wasn't a maximum health, it was just what she was at. So a lot of times you could take damage and then pop your gadget, and then you'd end up dealing like 1,000 damage, because a lot of the times you're not maximum HP when you go into a gunfight, right? So it was just really awkward to finish off brawlers. And then 3 days later, they literally scrapped the entire gadget in the fact that they completely reworked it. And I believe in the history of Brawl Stars, I don't think this has ever been done. So they reworked it to how it is now. So you do a amount of damage per the brawler's maximum HP, which is so much better. But as I said, it was just such a bad gadget, and that's why it got basically removed from the game 3 days later. All right guys, it's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think are the worst gadgets of all time. For me, it had to be between like Dynamite and that Colette gadget. I actually forgot about that Colette gadget just before my video, and then I just remember how completely trash it was, especially upon release. It was just funny to me how that was even a thing. But yeah, it's going to be it for today's video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.